So what has the Prime Minister renegotiated with the Irish backstop?
First, a joint instrument with comparable legal weight to the withdrawal agreement will guarantee that the EU cannot act with the intent of applying the backstop indefinitely. Second, the UK and the EU have made a joint statement in relation to the political declaration, and it makes a legal commitment that the UK and the EU will begin work immediately to replace the backstop with alternative arrangements by the end of December 2020. Third, alongside the joint instrument on the withdrawal agreement, the United Kingdom government will make a unilateral declaration that if the backstop comes into use and discussions on our future relationship break down, so that there is no prospect of subsequent agreement, it is the position of the United Kingdom that there would be nothing to prevent the UK instigating measures that would ultimately disapply the backstop.
Well, in a sense, nothing has changed. The main deal, called the withdrawal agreement, is still the same, and still includes the Irish backstop. Consider subscribing by the end of the video. Within the withdrawal agreement is the common rulebook, which essentially copy and paste the rules from EU law into UK law, essentially keeping the same rulebook and therefore being responsible under the European Court of Justice if we break one of those rules. But even that isn't good enough for creating a free border in Northern Ireland. The exact details of the UK's trade relationship with the EU is due to be negotiated once the withdrawal agreement can be agreed. But if the withdrawal agreement is agreed and the future trade relationship cannot be agreed, then in its place is the default option of the Irish backstop. Now, the Irish backstop means that if the UK cannot figure out a future trade deal by the end of the transition period, that's the period of time laid out for negotiating the future trade relationship, then the UK will remain in a permanent customs territory and Northern Ireland will remain in a form of single market. So the problems from being outside a single market and customs union will not apply, and therefore no hard border would need to be created on the island of Ireland. But Theresa May's deal was rejected for many reasons. But one of those reasons was because an independent panel of UK and EU members would only be able to agree our exit from such an arrangement. Therefore, we could be stuck in a customs territory for an indefinite period of time. That is all the same as it was the first time the deal got rejected. The Irish backstop still remains there. There will never be a hard border on the island of Ireland, if and only if this agreement is accepted by MPs. The old deal made it sound as though the backstop would be indefinite, so the government came up with a joint instrument, which is a legal text that doesn't change the withdrawal agreement itself, but has equal legal weight. In other words, it kind of does add to the agreement, even though the EU might never admit that. Now, how much legal weight this legal text actually has will come out in a statement by the Attorney General later today. But let's just take a look at what this joint instrument, as it's called, actually says about the backstop. So the joint instrument says that the EU cannot keep the UK in a customs union and Northern Ireland in a single market indefinitely. So even if the UK and the EU cannot find a solution to the Northern Irish border problem, staying in a customs union and keeping Northern Ireland in a separate single market arrangement will never apply permanently to the UK. If the EU acts badly and forces the UK to stay in a customs arrangement or forces Northern Ireland into a different economic relationship than the rest of the UK, then the UK can challenge that through arbitration. If the UK challenges that through arbitration, then an independent panel will look at what the EU is doing, and if they are forcing the UK to stay in this arrangement, then the UK can suspend the backstop. And if the UK suspends the backstop, then temporary remedies will be put in place. Whatever that means, it's quite unclear at the moment. As mentioned before, during the transition period, the future trade relationship and an alternative to the Northern Irish border will be negotiated. This is all laid out in the political declaration, and inside the political declaration is a legal commitment that says the UK and the EU should have an alternative arrangement to the backstop by the end of December 2020. So this doesn't put an end date on the backstop itself, only an end date to negotiating an alternative. So if we fall out with the EU during the negotiations on the future political declaration, the backstop will still go ahead, and there has been an added unilateral declaration that says there will be nothing to prevent the UK instigating measures that would ultimately supply the backstop. In other words, the UK and the EU have agreed that if the UK doesn't impose the backstop, in the event of a breakdown of talks, the UK will be subject to the same independent arbitration panel, who would likely force the UK to implement the backstop. But the backstop is still only there if talks break down and not as an alternative to things like using technology on the border or having checks away from the border or all the possible alternative to the Northern Irish border solution. The EU cannot force the UK into the backstop. If it does, an independent panel will make the judgment and give the rights for the UK to suspend the backstop. Then, temporary remedies will be put in place. The alternative to the backstop should be negotiated by the end of December 2020. But if we fall out with the EU, the UK will still have to impose the backstop. Do you think anything has changed? As always, join in the debate below and subscribe.